But Anthony, I want to take things to a bigger picture, because whilst this is going on in the US, we have some really big geopolitical tensions. As I mentioned, Russia amassing troops on the border with Ukraine. Seems that diplomacy not yielding results there so far. We've got 100,000 troops near the Ukrainian border. Russia's moving in tanks, infantry, fighting vehicles, rocket launchers, other military equipment. It's also got surface-to-air missile systems near Belarus, and even several ships near Ukraine's shores. Very aggressive posturing from Russia. Diplomacy so far yielding no results. And yet it doesn't seem to me like the markets are really taking these tensions too seriously. How are you digesting these big geopolitical tensions, if we can, in fact, be on the brink of a Russian-Ukrainian invasion?
Well, listen, I spent 11 days as White House communications director, which, and I got fired, obviously. But in that period of time, believe it or not, you get a chance to read a lot of information and you realize how complex and how complicated things are. And I would say to you that the United States has to make an intellectual, strategic, and geopolitical decision related to democracy. Do we stand for democracy, stand with democracy, and are we united with the free people around the world to protect other democracies? If we are still in that position, and I believe we need to be, and you don't have enough time for me to intellectualize as to why, but we are the only country that's capable of doing that, and a result of which has been, by and large, a force for good over the last 80 years. I think we have to stand with the Ukrainians and push back this aggression. Having said that, I have been to Afghanistan. I have been to Iraq. I know that kinetic wars are very, very painful. And anybody that has veterans in their family, which I do, you do not want to see a war break out. So I'm hoping that diplomacy prevails. But I think it's very, very important that if the Russians decide to invade a democracy, and we can talk about the Ukraine, where it was once part of Russia or the Soviet Union or not, and all the history there, I think it's a democracy now, and we have to protect that democracy. And so if it's a combination of a military response or a diplomatic or an economic response, I am in favor of those things. Having said that, I'm not a hawk, okay? And so I'm hoping that we can find a concentric circle somewhere with the Russian Federation where we can agree with each other about what needs to happen so that there'll be peace. You didn't ask me this, but I'm going to address it anyway. More worrisome to the markets is Taiwan. Because Let's say things go very badly in the Ukraine and it reattaches itself to the Soviet Union under the repressive regime of Vladimir Putin and the Russian military, the markets would likely shrug that off. And that's a cynical thing to say. And so that doesn't mean that that's the right thing to do, but that's likely what would happen. The Taiwanese situation is much more dire to the global economy. We're attached to Taiwan and the island of Formosa as a result of the semiconductor foundries, all the different manufacturing that happens there, and our strict promise to these Asian nations that the United States would reject any hegemonic activity from the Communist Party of China. So having said all that, you know how complicated it is. We have a one China policy, and we're hoping that our deterrence in that region is still strong enough to stop anything from happening.
Well, to your point, Anthony, China is watching this very, very closely to see how Putin tests the Biden administration. And you mentioned Afghanistan. The Biden administration widely criticized for the Afghanistan withdrawal debacle, that it signaled weakness from this administration. And that's what's essentially given Putin the cue here to test U.S. resolve. China obviously watching this very closely, as are Iran and North Korea. And we have Biden saying things like, the U.S. can tolerate a minor incursion, which many says only emboldens Putin. So if Russia does go ahead with this move in Ukraine, how vital is it that the Biden administration projects strength and competence here? Because as you just said, this will only serve to embolden our adversary. Is military intervention then needed if this does escalate and Russia does go ahead and invade Ukraine?
Very complicated question, as we both know. So let's just start with President Biden. That was obviously a gaffe. President Biden, at age 78, he probably wishes he didn't say that. And of course, he tried to take it back later.
That one, yeah.
I understand, but there may be some truth in that. I think that's where the indication is, and that's where the frustration is by diplomats. They don't want to give President Putin an opening to suggest something like that. I would think that there will be a form of a military response, an economic sanction, and a geopolitical response that would hurt Russia. Now, I have been a student of Russian literature and Russian history and culture. And I think I said at the World Economic Forum when I was working for Donald Trump that the Russians would eat snow if necessary to survive. And they've long been, they have a chip on their shoulder as it relates to the West. And some of that is quite justifiable. Remember, they won World War II. We may have supplied them with the material, but they beat Adolf Hitler in World War II. We helped them a little bit. We didn't get there until June of 1944. And so that's why they call it the Great Patriotic War. I have a respect for the culture. I understand the security issues that Vladimir Putin is facing, both externally and internally. And I also understand his mindset about the failure of the Soviet Union. And he wants to put a hurt on the West because he feels that the West put a hurt on the deconstruction of that regime or that empire. And so it's very, very complicated. So I don't want to under or overstate anything. But here's what I would say. The United States will respond. And it will respond in a way that the Russian Federation does not like. And that's one of the main reasons why we haven't seen activity yet. Now, somebody cynical would say, well, he went into Crimea after Sochi, the Winter Olympics. He's going to go into the Ukraine after the Chinese Olympics. He doesn't want to embarrass himself with China or put egg on the face of President Xi. And of course, the Foreign Ministry of China has spoken out in defense of Mr. Putin and President Putin and what he's doing. So maybe he's waiting. But I think while he's waiting, we have some very smart people on our side that are indicating to the Russians that this could be a disaster for you. And this could be where we were in 1962 related to the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I'm hoping he doesn't do it. I'm hoping that the rhetoric and the military movement will die down. And of course, if that happens, I think that will be mildly bullish for the markets. And I think it'll also send a message to the Chinese that the U.S., in conjunction with its allies, is still a quite strong military and economic force of deterrence globally. And so I hope that happens. If it doesn't happen, I'll respond appropriately for my clients and the markets. But I'll be surprised if that doesn't happen because we need it to happen. You didn't ask me about Donald Trump, but if Donald Trump were president, we'd probably already be faced with a reattachment of some of these republics to the Soviet Union. He was way weaker on Russia.
I'm going to have to challenge you on that one, Anthony, because I think one
Biden.
thing that the Trump administration or the president himself would convey was a certain uncertainty of how President Trump would react. And we didn't actually see any political foes test him too much, perhaps because of that whole wild card element that nobody exactly knew how Trump would respond. But this is clearly a topic we need to dig into much deeper, especially the fact that you've now enlightened me to the fact that you're an expert in Russian literature. Unfortunately, you did tell me you have a hard out that I have to respect. So we will have to have you back.
I didn't mean to imply that I'm an expert in Russian literature, but I've read a lot of it. I'm not a professor or anything like that. But let me say something to you, okay? President Trump was in Vladimir Putin's pocket. Okay, anybody that has really studied his
how can you say that if under the Trump administration there were harder sanctions against Russia than any other administration?
It's so obvious. He got forced into those sanctions. In fact, I was there in July.
I don't know how you can say that, Anthony. I have to challenge that because some of the toughest sanctions against Russia came under Trump. He certainly put the squeeze specifically on Russia's elite with his sanctions that were imposed over Russia's invasion of Crimea that happened under Obama. Those sanctions certainly weren't lifted under Trump. And then there's the big one, of course, that Trump, unlike Obama, did approve the sale of lethal weapons to Ukraine. He also ordered that missiles be fired at Syrian military sites openly, targeting strategic operations and allies of Russia, sending a very strong message to Putin. And then we know that Trump strongly objected to and blocked the Nord Stream pipeline, which Biden was very quick to approve very early on in his term. And that approval has now given Russia undue energy leverage over Germany and Europe, which is a point of contention now. So to say that Trump was in Putin's pocket.
But I was there in July. I was there in July of 2017 where he was pushing back against the Congress. And I explained to him on Air Force One, you're making a very big mistake because these guys in the Congress are going to override you and your own party is going to override you. So he got forced into those sanctions. Now we can redirect truth today. We can put the truth through a sausage grinder and make it come out differently today and case it differently. But I was there, and I understand why he was so obsequious to Vladimir Putin. And I also understand from our national security complex how worried they were about the lack of backbone related to Article 5 that Donald Trump was signaling as a result of the moves of President Putin. So
you think that
we can debate that, Michelle,
but Putin sees the Biden administration and Biden as a more formidable foe than they would consider Trump and the Trump administration? No question, 100%. Because what the Biden administration is doing, it's coalescing our allies. He's not snubbing our allies the way President Trump was doing, and also he gets Vladimir Putin, and he gets the risk that Vladimir Putin represents to the West. And of course, Donald Trump was in the guy's pocket. So, look, we could debate it all day if you want, Michelle, but I'm just letting you know, those are my opinions. You invited me on to share them. Absolutely.
And so those are my opinions. And, he would probably already be in Belarus by now and the Ukraine if we had Mr. Trump still in office. So thank God he's gone, and he'll never return, by the way, because there's a very strong group of us that are going to be working very hard against him in 2024.
All right, but let's focus on the current administration, because as you say, your hope is that Putin somehow withdraws from Ukrainian borders with his tail tucked between his legs, and that it doesn't come to a point.
Oh, he doesn't have to do that. He doesn't have to withdraw with his tail between his legs. They can find a diplomatic concession to give him.
All right.
He comes out of this victorious without creating bloodshed and the oppression of the Ukrainians. He could come out of this going back to his public saying that I did this for our national security. These are the concessions that I got from the West as it relates to our security perimeter. And so, no, he doesn't have to go back anywhere with his tail between his legs. I certainly don't predict that President Putin will ever do anything like that. We have to find a way to give him a way out. Remember, the Kennedy brothers told Khrushchev that they would take the missiles down in Turkey if he removed the installations in Cuba. And both sides, I think, agree that that was the better outcome than having a nuclear confrontation in the early 60s.
But the bigger picture that you're telling me here is that if the U.S. does not exhibit sufficient deterrence and does not posture itself as sufficiently powerful, and if there is, I understand that you say you do not want this to be the case and that you don't think this will be the case, but if Russia does go into Ukraine, that sends a signal to China that some kind of incursion or some kind of hostility towards Taiwan will be tolerated, and that you think is going to have or would have a big market impact.
I think the Chinese situation, for the market's perspective, not saying that both of these are not serious, but I'm just telling you my opinion of the market. Remember what John Maynard Keynes said: it's your job. You're in a beauty contest, and it's your job not to predict who's beautiful, but you have to look at what the other judges think are beautiful, and that's how the markets work. So I'm just observing what my colleagues in the marketplace are thinking about this, and so unfortunately, you have to apply some level of cynicism to that. Having said all of this, I'm an optimist. I predict that there will not be an attack, a Ukrainian attack. I predict that there'll be sufficient deterrence, and I think there'll be a way out that saves face for the Russian government and President Putin. And I think that the Chinese, who are very long-term thinkers, recognize this is not the time to be invading Taiwan. God forbid if it goes wrong for them, that would be quite consequential internally. And so I understand the need to try to reunify China. The most powerful military in the world, the United States, has deemed China a one China. We have a one China policy. And I think that will hopefully keep things in perspective as the Chinese think about their long-term political issues.
All right, but we will have to get you back to discuss more of these
anytime.
topics.
I promise to wear a suit next time. Okay.
Well, I do appreciate.
I'm in my Led Zeppelin crypto fashion wear. But since we're talking about geopolitics, I promise to wear Brioni next time.
All right, maybe a more suitable attire when we delve into geopolitics, but a t-shirt is certainly appropriate for the crypto conversation. I thank you for your opinions across the board. Whether I agree or disagree, I thank you for joining me here on Kitco News and for sharing your thoughts.
I like the disagreement. It's always fun for me. I like fighting. My wife is always saying to me, hey, thank God you beat up on Trump, because who are we going after next? I said, well, we're going to stay on Trump up until 2024.
Well, we'll have you back to discuss that, Anthony. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, be well.